As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission, I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain, keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road, lights, camera, action, I'm ready to go.
Good morning, New Haven. This is the Tom Ficklin Show, and this is Jesse the Walking Man Turner filling in for Tom today. And I have three lovely guests, talented and bright, and the best that New Haven has to offer. We have the wonderful, dynamic Dr. Lauren Anderson from Connecticut College, and on the library board in New Haven, the fabulous National American Library Association award winner and Connecticut. It was 2015 for the national, 2017 for the state Librarian of the Year, Diane Brown. And then we have the fabulous Robert Gibson. I think it was 28 years school librarian and teacher in New Haven, and still young as ever here today. And we're going to talk about our libraries today. And we sort of got a theme running today. And the theme is defending our sacred cultural capitals. That's our libraries. And I'd like us to think about something today. When you close the libraries, don't you destroy the community? And so I'm going to start off today, and I'm going to begin with, I'll begin with Lauren, and I'll ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself quickly, and what are you passionate about?
Sure. So my name is Lauren Anderson. I am a education professor up in New London, but I identify first and foremost as a teacher. I was a public school teacher for a number of years. I've worked with teachers ever since then. I teach about the history of public schools, and it's a complicated story, much like the history of public libraries. I'm passionate about putting books in the hands of young people, and especially, I think, poetry, because poetry is a thing that is written to be read out loud, and it just lights a fire in so many people as readers and just lovers of the word. And so I would say that's me in a nutshell.
All right, thank you. And Miss Diane Brown, you're up.
My name is Diane Brown. Born and raised in New Haven. I am a librarian and branch manager, Stetson Library in New Haven. And what I'm passionate about the most is continuing to present my library as a cultural arts center for the community that I serve, basically Dixville, New Hallville, and the greater New Haven area. So that's what I'm passionate about, that people come in, learn their history. We have programs where people of color can learn their history, and I'm just very passionate about what I do on a day-to-day basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Mr. Gibson, you're up, sir.
I'm a native New Havener, a product of the New Haven Public Schools. I was a teacher at Hill House High School for 35 years, 28 years as a history teacher, and 7 years as a school librarian there. And I'm passionate about having our students have an equal access to a quality education. I believe that reading is fundamental to the educational development of our young people, and libraries play a key role in that. One of the first things I did to my students when they came in at the beginning of the school year was that I gave them a homework assignment. I said, your first homework assignment on the first day of class is to go to the public library and get a library card. And when they would bring those cards in, they would get credit for that, because I knew that the work that I was going to give them was going to require that they use resources beyond a textbook, and they would need the public library as well as the school library as well as my own classroom library to get the information that they needed to be successful. So libraries play a very important role in the public and in our school system, and they need to be valued. But also, not just the resources, not just the computer resources and the technology and the books, but the people that are trained to guide the public and our young people in our schools to the right information is so vitally important.
So we're talking about a librarian as a professional. So the New Britain School District last year laid off all their school librarians and all their school librarian media specialists. And they're supposed to be manned by volunteers. And when I look at that, I say that's intentional. That's part of systemic racism because that's not happening in Madison. That's not happening in Darien. That's not happening in Farmington. That's not happening in Simsbury. So I think if we thought about if one of you could take the lead on what was the purpose of libraries? Why did we open libraries in the first place? Someone want to jump at that?
Well, I think if we look at any of our great academic institutions around the nation, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, any of them, they all have valued the importance of libraries. Yale University was started because of a contribution of books to the collegiate school in 1701. And so, if it is so important for those great academic institutions to have always had libraries, and Yale has one of the largest libraries in the world, then that should send a clear signal to any city and any school district that to cut libraries, to close libraries down, to lay off librarians and library media specialists is an action that is not conducive to the development of the academics in the system and the educational opportunities for the students and the public.
So if we thought about Rudine Sims Bishops, Dr. Bishops talks about books being mirrors, windows, and doors. And she says that what we should do is we should be able to open a book and see ourselves in there. And if we don't see ourselves, we should be able to look in the mirror to see others. And then she says the most powerful, transformative power in literature is when we can open the sliding door and step into the shoes of another. So I want to think about this current state of librarians and libraries, and I want to give it a little twist in terms of it seems to me that we're defending libraries today, not in our most affluent communities, not at Yale, not at Harvard, not at my college, Central Connecticut State University, but we're here today defending libraries in many ways in communities of color. So can someone take that up? Why is this?
For me, I'm a public librarian, and I do um, I take issue with schools in any city laying off or getting rid of media specialists. In the service area that I provide service for, Dixwell and Newhallville, it's so much easier for myself or my children's librarian to go into a school, speak directly to the media specialist, and say, what are the issues you're having here? What are the problems? What books do you not have? How can we supplement as a public library? That's one point of contact in the school. When you get rid of the media specialist, we now have to work directly with teachers individually, which is not a problem. We continue to do that, but it makes it a lot easier and more transparent when we're able to deal directly with the media specialist. The second point is you're talking about racism, you're talking about opening up a book and being able to see yourself. Stetson Branch Library has one of the largest African American collections of books in one setting. I most of my time outside of the administrative things I have to do, most of my time is spent I'm sorry, trying to maintain and keep up with um, an Afro-centered collection that anyone can come in, not just children, adults can come in and open up a book and see yourself and learn about yourself. That's my biggest thing that I bring to Stetson Library. And it's not just a place of information. Stetson Branch Library serves as a community center. It's a safe place. Parents will tell their children the only place you're allowed to go in that community is Stetson Branch Library. So it's not just a library, it's a safe haven, it's a safe space for people to come. Many adults come throughout the day, maybe looking for a job. Some people just come in and say, I'm here just because I need a break. It's a quiet space. I can sit down, I can get my head together, my thoughts together, and I just want to come sit here for a little while. So it's for my branch, it's more than just us keepers of information. It's a cultural art center for the community.
So they are that cultural capital in our communities. And I was wondering, Lauren, could you talk a little bit about research on this? Is there what do we know about this historically?
Yeah, I'm absolutely. And I'll start just with history because I think the points you're bringing up about where sort of libraries, and I do want to say that the library, the public library in New Haven, is really flourishing, and it's thanks to the work of people like Diane who have just fought for years to make the branches really beautiful and community responsive spaces. And so if you're listening and you haven't been to Stetson, you really got to get over there and to other spots in the city. I think just in terms of the kind of history piece, I mentioned when I just introduced myself that I teach about the history of public schools. It's a complicated history, not always pretty at all. The same is really true about public libraries, and I think it's important to sort of recognize that I think it's something like 75% of the libraries, public libraries that we have in the country, are sort of the product of the work of largely Black women advocating for the creation of branches in communities. And that dates way, way back. You know, a lot of the time when we talk about the history of libraries, people talk about Carnegie and the giant financial infusion that he provided to create libraries. But of course, at that time, libraries weren't for everyone.
That's right.
And they weren't being built for everyone. And it was actually Black women. It's really on the backs of Black women, like so many things in in our country, that our library system has been built for the betterment of the communities that they're part of, and the love of children and knowledge and democracy, like real democracy, not fake democracy, that I think is deeply a part of that like cultural legacy. And so I think it's just such a crime to see libraries undermined. And again, we're fortunate in New Haven. I think there's a lot of broad support, and the library is going through an amazing time. But I also think that the role of librarians is essential, both in public libraries and in public schools. I think it's public schools right now where we see some of the most, I think, just like depressing statistics. We know that libraries and librarians contribute to the well-being of communities. We know that people are healthier, feel more connected, have a stronger sense of belonging in places where they're kind of nearby to libraries and books and amenities like that. I also think that when it comes to education, we know that kids in schools with full-time librarians just fare better across the board when it comes to literacy outcomes. And also, I think when it comes to socio-emotional outcomes, one of the national statistics that I think is just so upsetting, right, is since 2000 across the country, and to your point, not just in every community, but in particular communities, lower income, urban communities, and communities of color, we've lost almost 20% of full-time librarian positions. And that has happened here in New Haven. And I don't want to say too much for too long, but I want to give a really good example that I think hits at some of the role that a librarian can play. So there was a librarian in this last kind of set of reductions that happened in New Haven who came from an academic career in librarianship in Puerto Rico and was specifically hoping to serve, and came to New Haven to serve, a dual immersion school. Because she was dual certified in math, when the reductions to librarians happened, she was kind of moved around and put in another school. And she was essentially replaced by a part-time librarian who's monolingual in a school that serves a huge population of native Spanish-speaking young folks who she was really dedicated to working with. And, she was in a really unique position to provide services to. And so I think when we think about what it means to be a librarian, and a librarian that serves a particular community, I think, there's a lot of like kind of missing information in the public about what is it that librarians actually do? What is it that they provide? And just why are they so essential? I mean, I think if you've ever seen what a school librarian who loves her job does, you understand what that is. But if you haven't, you might just think it's somebody sitting around watching books all day. And I know that the people kind of here in the room with me can speak to the fact that it is so much more than that, and that it is about sort of the preservation of cultural wealth, the building of community relationships, and then also just the sort of fundamental stuff of literacy that we know is just so important for outcomes of all kinds, not just academic, but like, humanistic.
So I'd like to ask Robert a question, because Robert, you are something that I never saw in my school library or my local library. I never saw a male librarian. we had no librarians of color. So could you have been the black male librarian? And I can't see anything more powerful than librarians. Probably the most dangerous thing in America is a black librarian in some circles.
Yes.
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 So could you tell us about that
Yeah.
experience, Robert?
Well, I guess I can say I made history by being the first one in Hillhouse High School.
Yes.
Um, it's a field that's dominated by women, and it's a field that has very few black males in it. Um, be interesting, be a good idea to get more people, uh, black and Hispanic males, to enter that field. It will be very helpful. Teachers, as we all know, serve more than just as educators, but we serve as role models.
Yes.
And so it's a powerful signal to send to the community. See a black man or a Hispanic man promoting books and literacy and learning. Uh, I think I mentioned to you earlier that we had at Hill House a black male librarian after I retired. And he did a lot of great work with those kids. But unfortunately, at the beginning of this school year, New Haven laid off both librarians at Hill House. One was terminated, and one was transferred. And the one that was transferred was a black male, and they put him into a classroom in the elementary school, which was not his desire, not his interest, because he had always taught at the high school level, and so that was totally demoralizing for him. So rather than stay in the system, he left the district and went to Madison. But here we had in a predominantly black and Hispanic high school in New Haven, a black male librarian who was doing great work along with the woman that was working with him, who was also African American. And because of the cutbacks, decisions made by the leadership of the school system, he wound up leaving the district altogether and is working in a suburban community. And that was a tremendous loss to our school, a tremendous loss to the district. We need to value valuable people more than we do, and not think that they are so easily replaceable. You know, good educators are valuable, and they should be treated as the gold that they are. And when they are treated like pawns, and the conception is they can be so easily replaced, that is not the case. And so many of the decisions that are made at the top are having a detrimental, harmful effect on our kids in our schools, because if we really want to put kids first, one of the things not to do is to close libraries and to eliminate school librarians.
Can I just add
Sure.
to that and just say that the same is true for this librarian that I mentioned, who was at Christopher Columbus Family Academy, was transferred and ultimately ended up leaving New Haven, even though she had come here, from Puerto Rico, specifically dedicated to serving the population that she was serving. And really, it's just such a loss that these decisions that end up deprioritizing librarians as educators in schools really cost children tremendously and cost communities.
I think part of what happens is a result of ignorance or misperception, because a lot of people in school leadership don't know the role of the school library media specialist. And some do have the idea that all they do is sit around and pass out books to kids. But the school librarian is a vital part of the school community. They work with the teachers on curriculum and all kinds of projects. They are teachers. So that's another thing that people forget, that school librarians are teachers. And so they are partners with the faculty and staff of the school, and they are partners with the students in helping them with projects and research that they have to do for all of their classes. And the school librarians work with all the departments, from PE to science, and But not only that, the library, like you were saying, is like a refuge.
Mm.
And we have kids that would come to our libraries and our schools not because the teacher brought them. They come because they want to be there. They come on their lunch break. They come to read on their own. They come to read independently. And there are kids that love to read, and they come to the librarians and they ask them for recommendations for books to read. That is so very important. You know, in order to succeed, you have to read.
Mm.
And you have librarians in our schools that encourage and promote our kids to read. And when kids learn to love to read, that is most of the battle.
Mm-hmm.
Because no matter whatever else we may do to try to prep them for standardized tests and other kinds of testing, if a child loves to read, they're going to be successful in any academic endeavor.
So there are 2 points I like to say. First of all, about these standardized tests, we have a whole body of research by Dr. Stephen Krashen, Jeff McQuillan, that support that access to books and libraries, public school libraries and school librarians are one of the most important factors for ensuring that children do well on those assessments. That's one. Then I want to get back to something. Maybe it's a little bit of testifying. My mama was a good church lady and said you should testify every once in a while. And as a child, we had some times where we were homeless for a couple of years, and my mother she worked during the day and she'd go to work. People forget that homeless people go to work over there. I think they're just hanging around, like, I don't know, at the libraries and stuff. But what my mother used to do was, just like Diane said, after school, my mission was to get myself to the library.
Mm-hmm.
And at the library, the librarians knew my situation. One of the librarians was my mother's high school chum who graduated with her. And she made sure every day that I was taken care of. The library was on the bus stop where my mother would get off and come in and pick me up. And she would say, "Hello, Marge. Did you have a good day today? He's been a good kid today." And I remember she would not only give me great books to read, she would give me a cup of hot chocolate and a cookie. Yeah. But so, Diane, there's this humanity in our public libraries that are very different than our academic libraries. I'm not saying that academic libraries don't have humanity in them. They do. But our public libraries, they sort of hold the humanity of the world. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Yes, I wanted to add on kind of what the conversation was previously. And I'm sorry, it ties into what you said. I'm sorry, my allergies. People do think that librarians, first of all, people don't understand that librarians have to get degrees. Many people don't understand that. The second thing, I feel like all librarians are educators. The next thing is people think that all we do is sit around all day long and pass out books. But I've invited some people, young and older, through my career as being a librarian, to come and spend a day or two with me. And at the end, they would all say, "You make it look so easy." There are so many administrative things that I have to do. Then I have to put another face on and deal with the public and deal with the humanity and the social side of giving people advice. It's not just about reading books. People are looking for jobs. People are looking for information about their health care. People sometimes just want to come in and have a 5-minute conversation because there's no one to talk to. We have a large homeless population. We have homeless families. There's so much that happens, I can say, at Stetson Library. But taking all that into consideration, the previous conversation topic that came up was talking about race. Not just as a librarian, but I'm also a Black librarian. And that's a struggle in itself. That's work for me every day, whether it's with my own institution or dealing with the community. People saying little comments like, "So you're a real librarian." So maybe my color doesn't equal to be a real librarian. So it's tough. It's tough, and it doesn't end. Just when you think things kind of smooth out a little bit, you're called into question again. I know what's needed for the people in the community that I serve. And one thing that I'm very blessed is to have a community that supports me because I support them. That's very vital for me. Um, like you said, there are so many people. Your family was homeless, and your mom looked for them to be surrogate moms or dads or whoever's in the library. I get that every day. So my responsibility is not just about books or information. My responsibility also is I'm somewhat a mother and grandmother in the neighborhood. No one's asked me to take that role on. It's just a part of who I am. I'm honored to take that on, that someone would trust me with their children. Someone would trust me giving their children advice. Someone would trust me to say, my daughter or son is at Hill House High School. There's no longer a Mr. Gibson there or someone there that they can talk to. I'm going to send my daughter, my granddaughter, over to Stetson Library. Diane, will you talk to her about how vital it is to stay in school? I was a teen mom. I had my son when I was 17. Mr. Gibson was my son's teacher, and my son didn't have a father for several years. It was black men like Mr. Gibson that played a role model for my son. Mr. Gibson was a surrogate father to many young black men in New Haven. So I know the importance of having that community piece, and I'm just so blessed that I have a venue that I can do for my community all the things that I believe that need to get done. Everyone doesn't understand that. Everyone says, well, you're a librarian. You went to school to be a librarian. You're supposed to be cataloging books, gathering information, doing research. I still do all those things. And to be honest with you, most of the time, I do those things in the evening when I get home because a large part of my day is with the community.
Yeah, it's social work.
It's
really,
social work.
In a lot of
It's
ways.
social work. It's with the community. How do you tell a young teen mom at 17 years old that comes in and says, you know what, Miss Diane, I'm here to talk to you because my mom said that you had a child when you were young. Can you give me some guidance? I'm at Hill House High School trying to graduate, and I'm just trying to push myself through. It's a part of my job as a black woman to do this for my community. And I'm on radio now talking about it. I make no apologies for it. No one has ever come to me about my job performance at the New Haven Free Public Library. I manage some kind of way to get it all in there. So no one can ever say, well, you're not doing this because you're doing that. Some kind of way, through the grace of the Creator, I'm able to get it all done. And I'm blessed for that.
But can I just say, I do think it raises this thing that I know Jesse is like working with teachers. It's like great teachers are the best teachers are always community cultural workers. And they're doing all of this work, often in like beyond the job that they have and get undercompensated for already. So I actually just think it's like a really important thing to say, the part when Diane was talking about having a community that supports her, and that like we all as members of the public in a city really need to support our librarians for the work that they do during those hours that the library is open, but also in the ways that their work ultimately, when they're doing their job well, spills over into the hours when they're not in the library or in the classroom, grinding in the morning and late at night to get things done, so that when a kid comes in or an adult comes in or youth comes in and they just need to be seen and heard, that everything can kind of be dropped in that moment, and that important like baseline stuff of like recognizing one another's humanity can happen, especially when it's somebody who you feel like really knows you or knows your family and is connected to you and kind of understands what you're bringing to the table in a really deep way. I don't know, it reminds me of the ways that we kind of all need to be invested, and maybe you all have done your duty, but I'm pointing at myself. I'm pointing at myself and like sort of others. We all need to like do a better job of just educating one another about the kinds of work that people in these roles actually are doing, the labor of love, because ultimately a lot of it isn't compensated, but it should be. And the fact that our city budgets are what they are is also part of systemic racism. And, making the kind of press to ensure that we are in a position to better fund this like essential labor is just really important.
I think investing in our libraries will pay the best dividend for our communities, for our schools, for our community at large. A few years ago, before he passed away, I had the opportunity to hear August Wilson speak, and he was talking about his life as a kid. And not that I'm recommending that kids do this, but he would cut school to go to the library, and he would go in the library and spend the day basically reading.
That says something about
And
school.
reading. And look what he became. You know, he became a great internationally known artist in the theater. And we have a lot of young people that are like that. They love to read. And our job as school librarians is to steer them into areas that will be most beneficial to them based upon their interest. And as a librarian at my school, if we didn't have a book and a kid was interested in reading that book, I went out and got that book, and I made sure that they would have it available. Um, there was some talk about a controversial book that some schools have banned, and a student came in. They wanted to know about the book, wanted to know if we had the book. I said, no, we don't have it, but I'll get it for you. We, as educators, want our kids to read because it broadens their horizon. It takes them to worlds that they have never known and may never know. And so to cut school librarians or public librarians or to close down libraries is a tragedy that should never happen in this country.
So we thought about this piece. If we look at the great libraries, right, and a time when kings and queens of Europe and European capitals had libraries of less than 450 books. We had the Egypt's Alexandria Library. We had the House of Wisdom in Iraq that had 250,000 pieces when we're talking 400. And we look at when empires are crushed, what do? We burn the library in Alexandria. I'm still angry about that. Over there, what do? Where's the House of Wisdom in Iraq today? It's nowhere near where it was. And here we are in our nation. And it's nobody from outside. It's from within, coming in and dismantling those cultural capitals that probably, as everyone can testify today, lift ups. I'm Connecticut's Moral Monday Education Ambassador. And we talk about this all the time. And we say what's happening in our schools, what's happening in our communities, what's happening in our libraries. This is intentional. This is systemic racism. So I don't want us to dwell on that concept, but I would love to hear about the importance of libraries in communities of color.
Well, let me just say this, that sometimes you have to fight for what's right. And I don't believe any suburban community would tolerate the closing of a library or the laying off of a library media specialist in their school. And in our community, our parents need to speak up, show up, and make some demands. If there's a threat of closing a Stetson, then the people need to speak up.
They did.
If there are librarians that are being terminated in our school system, parents need to speak up, because you can guarantee if in one of our suburban communities there was a plan to lay off librarians or close libraries, there would be a tremendous number of people, parents, that would show up at a board meeting to make it crystal clear that they would not stand for that to happen. And we need to have that kind of courage, conviction, and action in our community when there are plans to close down or to lay off school librarians.
So, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I wanted to make a quick comment. Several years ago, don't ask me the year. I'm not good at remembering years.
Just preach.
But John DeStefano, former Mayor John DeStefano, there was budget cuts in the city of New Haven. And true story, these are facts. And one of the cuts was going to be Stetson Branch. Now, the former director, Mr. Wellborn, may God be pleased with him, he was my director. He was my mentor. He was the only black director the New Haven Free Public Library System ever had. He was a great man. Mr. Wellborn came to me and told me that they were coming after Stetson Library. It was a Friday afternoon. I'll never forget. And I said, well, what does that mean, Mr. Wellborn? He said, well, they want to close Stetson Library down because it circulates the least amount of books. And that was the measuring stick. I said, well, Mr. Wellborn, we know we're past that now. We don't measure a library's worth according to how many books circulate. We measure it by other things that the community come in and may or may not need. And he said, I understand that, Diane. He said, and I gave you some information to do research on it. In fact, it was interesting because several months prior to that, Mr. Wellborn came to me, and I didn't really realize how much of a hellraiser Mr. Wellborn was as a black librarian in the Baltimore area. He raised a lot of hell, and I didn't realize that. So he gave me some information to look at, and I was reading it. So when he came to me and told me what was going on, and I said, well, Mr. Wellborn, what am I going to do? And he said, well, I'm the director, Diane, and this is what the decision that has been made over my head. I'm telling all the facts out here, and I have no fear because it's the facts. And he said to me, well, you know what, Diane? I said, Mr. Well, what am I going to do? He said, you have to do what's in your heart, and I know what you're going to do already. So you do it. So I called my mother, who's a hellraiser herself. I guess that's where I got it from, community hellraiser. And my mother said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, Ma, I want to fight. And she said, well, you know your career in New Haven as a librarian is going to be in jeopardy if you fight, because, of course, you have to. I'm a city employee. I can't make a comment, not supposed to make a statement, supposed to let the press for the mayor's office speak. And I said, no, the mayor's press person can't speak for me in my community. So I went to the community and asked them what they want me to do. They said, we're going to fight and we're going to stand with you. That was a turning point of my library career in New Haven. I mean, I got thousands of signatures on a petition in 3 days. They formed together a coalition of concerned citizens for Stetson. In fact, I still have the information at my library archived as history. I will never throw it away. I have the signatures. I have the petitions. And we went down to the New Haven Free Public Library for a rally. John DeStefano came up and spoke. The community came out strong. They made it clear. They made phone calls to City Hall. You're not shutting down Stetson Branch Library. So long story short, I don't know if it was a political ploy. I don't know what it was. But for me, it showed me that my community supported me and I supported them. And that's when myself and the community, even though I was raised in that community, I had to build trust with them. So at that point, it was a turning point. We didn't look back after that. After a decision was made or not made or unmade or try to act like it was being made, that Stetson Branch wasn't going to be closed, Stetson Branch just soared to so many heights after that. I knew the community was with me, was with me, and I was with them. And I had a guy came to me and said, we realized that your job was in jeopardy, but you did that for us because you could easily walked away and said, well, close Stetson Library. My job wasn't going to be taken away. I was just going to be moved to another location. And so, but I fought, and I'm so grateful to my mother who taught me how to stand up for what I believe. Like you said, it would never happen in a suburban community. They would all stand up and fight. So that's what I did, and I'm glad that the community stood with me. So I wanted to let you know that's a real story, and it happened in New Haven.
And what we have is the community stepping up. So
yes,
in Moral Mondays and Black Lives Matter, we like to say that's turn up. That's when people turn up, and turn up works. Fight the power works. You know, a little bit of Public Enemy. I can throw my fist in the air and say, fight the power. Dr. Anderson, I'd like to know, there's a history. I've heard about the great Carnegie libraries and Andrew Carnegie giving millions, but what was the role of women? Because I seem to, whenever I look at, I'm a product of a single parent household, you know, and my mother seemed to be lifting me. And even when she's not in the world now, she's still lifting me.
Yes.
Could you tell me about the role that women played in libraries? Was it Andrew Carnegie that did it all?
No, I mean, he wrote a really big check, right? Which was not unimportant, but I think, you know, the librarianship, and I think some of the challenges that have like just implicitly been mentioned are similar ones to, I guess, the teaching profession in terms of recruitment. I mean, it's feminized professions that were initially intended for women, right? Teaching, librarianship, nursing, where we see kind of gross undercompensation and oftentimes just not the same kind of social value, kind of in mainstream conversation applied to those professional pathways. Of course, we know really differently. And we also know, like, in communities of color, teachers, librarians, nurses are tremendously valued. And I do think it was women, especially Black women, who have made the library system what it is in terms of just being an open space for all people. And obviously, like, when libraries were created most formally, kind of during the 1800s in our country, they were segregated spaces. And so that part, when I hear, especially like just Robert and Diane talking, it makes me think a lot about the importance of teaching history and teaching history really well. Because I think if we did a better job teaching young people the kind of real history of our public institutions, they would actually feel tremendously inspired, I think, to continue the legacy of activism that has produced the very best aspects of those public institutions. To take nothing away from Carnegie, but it's really a tradition of, women's work and Black women's activism and the work of the civil rights movement that has like opened up access and kind of made the potential, sort of realized some of the greatest potential of public libraries as places where everyone can come and everyone is welcome, where we have intergenerational contact zones with young people and older people. And oftentimes, women have been the backbone of communities. And so it's not surprising that they're oftentimes in libraries as librarians, creating these amazing sort of familial connections between people in the community, generating programming ideas and working with community members to do that so that people are coming into branches for things other than just, for drum circles and for figuring out kind of that longer legacy of where they come from and what they're a part of and the sort of profound cultural wealth that they carry in themselves. I would just hope, sort of like going forward, that we all like societally can do a better job of honoring the work of these like longstanding feminized professions and really doing a better job to open them up to the broader range of people who really need to be a part of them and carry them forward, right? So the the image we have of a public librarian, like we would be so much better served at that if that image was Diane and Robert more in the forefront of people's minds than I think what it often is.
So brings us, we're coming down to the last few minutes, and I think I'm going to ask people about their final message. But we're looking at a society that just gave a $1 trillion tax break to our wealthiest citizens.
Mhm.
We're looking at a society that spent $1.2 trillion on a No Child Left Behind, which has left our children scoring the lowest they have ever in 35 years on the SATs over there. We're looking at a nation that has bailed out its banks, bailed out Wall Street, seems to bail out everybody with money. And I like to think about, if I had a message today, the heart of the nation, the cultural capital of the nation, the hope of the nation, that lies in our libraries. And if you're not funding them, you don't have a heart. You don't have a love for your people. So I want to just begin with Robert. Sort of final message, sort of like, hey, people, the world's not falling.
Well, our principal, who's now retired, Dr. Lonnie Garris, always used to say that the library at Hill House was the hub of the school and that everything else tied into it. And we've got to look at it that way, that our educational system in New Haven, we must put some priority on making sure that every school has a library and that every school has a library media specialist. We can't be penny wise and pound foolish. We must make the right kinds of investments with our young people. And when it comes to cuts, it seems that the cuts are always at the level that directly affect our students. And that is not a wise move. Our kids, if they're going to be considered kids first, We must make sure that they have the educational resources and human and material to provide for their success academically. Um, we have to value school libraries, public libraries, more than we do because our nation's future is tied into them. And if we neglect our libraries, we're neglecting literacy. And when we neglect literacy, our future is going to be very dim.
All right, Diane.
Very quick and brief. I just would encourage parents, guardians, grandparents, custodians. You need to really get up and get out, as Mr. Gibson said, and learn what's going on in your children's schools, what's going on with the public library. You need to get out and support. You need to show up and show out.
Turn up America.
And I would just say, I mean, so many wonderful things already said. It's really a matter of, and we have the money to support public libraries. I think first and foremost, we should be grateful for the fact that we're in a city where so many people have done amazing work around the library system and that it is flourishing, but we should be vigilant about kind of making sure that that energy is carried forward. I also think that as an example, to have a school librarian in every New Haven public school would basically cost $4 million salary and fringe. Sounds like a lot of money, right? Full time. It's not when you compare that to a $29 billion endowment, for example, of an institution right here. We're in a wealthy state. We have a wealthy, world-renowned institution, and we have the capacity to fund our libraries to their fullest. So we really need to do the work to make it a priority and to set policies that will enable that for the good of all children and communities and families and generations.
So just reminding everybody, this is 103.5, the Tom Ficklin Show. Dr. Turner filling in, the walking man over here. And I would say, who do we have in the studio today? We have the canaries in the coal mines of America's humanity. Lauren Anderson, Diane Brown, Robert Gibbons, thank you, bless you. Hey, God bless you, New Haven.
Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you go.